Welcome back to the History of the Ancient Near East. I'm your instructor, Justin Singleton. Now, in this lecture, we are going to discuss an ancient Mesopotamian story of a guy by the name of Tabu-utul-Bel of Nippur. And this story is titled Ludlu-Bel Nemeki, which translates into I will praise the Lord of Wisdom. This story is often called the Mesopotamian Job story. Now, in our discussion of this ancient Mesopotamian text, we will analyze the text, noting that within their cult, impiousness brings destruction, and that no one can ever actually know the gods, before contrasting the story with Job, comparing the features and noting the underlying differences between the two. Now, to some, it's a startling fact to discover that the biblical text, more often than not, has some correlation to text found within the broader ancient Near East, but outside of the Israelite community. Ranging from creation myths to wisdom literature, it's discovered that our Israelites of the Old Testament are, in fact, a people within a time and culture after all. Of course, much is said about the similarities, for both good and bad. But is there actually a difference deeper than simple cultural similarities? In his book, The Bible Among the Myths, John Oswalt gives a rather interesting comparison of ancient Near Eastern and biblical texts. In his view, there's one major difference that carries across the board, what he calls the difference between continuity and transcendence. Here, what I'd like to do is test this theory using Oswalt's work as a guide on Ludlu-Bel Nemeki and the Book of Job. To establish a difference, Oswalt gives us some common features of both ideals. Concerning continuity, an idea that all things that exist are part of each other, we're given the following common features: polytheism, images, this is like idols, eternity of chaotic matter, personality not essential to reality, a low view of the gods, conflict is a source of life, low view of humanity, no single standard of ethics, and a cyclical concept of existence. Concerning transcendence, we're given these common characteristics: monotheism, iconoclasm, first principle is spirit, absence of conflict in the creation process, a high view of humanity, the reliability of God, God is suprasexual, God is desacralized, sex is desacralized, prohibition of magic, ethical obedience as a religious response, and the importance of human historical activity. Unfortunately, not all of these will find correspondence with either Ludlu-Bel Nemeki or the Book of Job. Nonetheless, there are significant differences when viewed through the lenses of Oswalt's guide of characteristics or features. Now, before those can be identified, an analysis of both texts is in order, but seeing that students are usually already, at least somewhat familiar with the Book of Job, a deep analysis will consist only of Ludlu-Bel Nemeki. If we were to summarize this ancient Sumerian story titled Ludlu-Bel Nemeki with three simple phrases, it would look something like this: impiousness typically brings destruction. No one can understand the gods, but nonetheless, Marduk is great and can heal. Now, there's more, of course, but these three ideas seem to gravitate toward a central theme. Now, several minor themes arise as well, including the following: the sufferer's body was a disease-ridden prison, most conjurers could not figure out the problem, the gods didn't help, and a whole lot more. These minor themes may illuminate the major themes when the story is read as a whole and when analyzed within their proper significance. For instance, the 7 examples given of the dreadful disease that the sufferer has or is facing, along with the unmentioned theme of being at the moment of death, strengthen the speaker's argument that no one can truly understand the gods, which was the second major theme. Why? Because typically speaking, the impious are the ones stricken with such illnesses, which is the first major theme. Thus, in this analysis, we begin with a summary of the first major theme, including its various subthemes. The sufferer, later noted as one Tabu Utul Bel of Nippur, appears to be quite distraught, and for a good reason. As is typically thought, suffering is for the bad guys. The sufferer even begins his story with this important idea. After introducing himself as one who has reached the allotted lifespan, and therefore somebody who knows quite well how the world should function, the sufferer states that oppression is increased, but uprightness I see not. Not too long after that quick note of oppression, and after an additional note concerning a lack of help on the part of both the gods and the conjurers, the sufferer exclaims, "How deeds are reversed in the world!" This phrase introduces the first major theme present in Lula Bel Nameki, that impiousness typically brings destruction, as it's followed by a series of 11 examples of such, with an additional 5 examples with a complementary subtheme. In verses 10 to 22 of the story, these relate the initial 11 examples. How deeds are reversed in the world. I look behind, oppression encloses me, like one who the sacrifice to God did not bring, and at mealtime did not invoke the goddess, did not bow down his offering was not seen, like one in whose mouth prayers and supplications were locked, for whom God's day had ceased, a feast day became rare, one who has thrown down his fire pan, gone away from their images. God's fear and veneration has not taught his people, who invoked not his God when he ate God's food, who abandoned his goddess and brought not what is prescribed, who oppresses the weak, forgets his God, who takes in vain the mighty name of his God. He says, I am like him. These examples are explained by certain impious acts, like a lack of sacrifices, lack of praying over his meal, lack of offerings, prayers, lack of celebrating the feast days, lack of burning to the idols, a lack of fear and veneration of the deity, lack of following the right prescriptions, lack of obeying the deity's injunction concerning helping the weak, and a lack of acknowledging the greatness of the deity. These are the guys who are supposed to be suffering. Indeed, these impious acts typically should bring opposition, disease, and trouble. But in the case of the sufferer, deeds are reversed in the world. For he himself is a very pious man who is in fact suffering. Now, to help prove his point, the sufferer continues his text with a series of examples in parallelism of his own pious nature. He says, but I myself thought of prayers and supplications. Prayer was my wisdom, sacrifice my dignity. The day of honoring the gods was the joy of my heart. The day of following the goddess was my acquisition of wealth. The prayer of the king, that was my delight. And his music, for my pleasure was its sound. I gave directions to my land to revere the names of God. To honor the name of the goddess, I taught my people. Reverence for the king, I greatly exalted. And respect for the palace, I taught the people. For I knew that with God, these things are in favor. The righteousness of the sufferer bears out in the simple fact that he knew that with God these things are in favor. showing that his devotion came from a strict knowledge of things prescribed. This fact is complicated by multiple examples of conjurers not being able to establish any violation on his part. Now, perhaps I should take a moment, again, another little rabbit trail, but forgive me. I want to touch again on this idea of continuity. This idea is that everything is cyclical. What happens in the world of mankind happens in the world of nature and also happens in the world of the gods. So, these conjurers are able to take an animal, to slice it open, to look at its intestines and its liver and everything else, and to see the sins that this guy has committed to have all of these problems befall him. They're able to do this because there is a connection between the world of nature, the world of men, and the world of the gods. But when these guys did this, what happened? Well, the seer by his oracle did not discern the future, nor did the enchanter with a libation illuminate my case. I consulted the necromancer, but he opened not my understanding. The conjurer with his charms did not remove my ban. He goes on, my sickness baffled the conjurers, and the seer left dark my omens. The diviner has not improved the condition of my sickness. The duration of my illness, the seer could not state. The point is taken. If the conjurers find it difficult to illuminate the case of the sufferer, then this is indeed contrary to what one typically finds in the world around. Now, perhaps at this point, the actual suffering of Tabu Atul Bel should be brought to light as it illuminates, the case for modern readers. This force of his suffering is explained on the backside of the first tablet and is read as follows. Forgot to click the button. Forgive me. Into my prison my house is turned. Into the bonds of my flesh are my hands thrown. Into the fetters of myself my feet have stumbled. With a whip he has beaten me, talking about his God. There is no protection. With a staff he has transfixed me. The stench is terrible. All day long the pursuer pursues me. In the night watches he lets me breathe not a moment. Through torture my joints are torn asunder. My limbs are destroyed. Loathing covers me. On my couch I welter like an ox. I am covered like a sheep with my excrement. Indeed, shortly later in the text, the sufferer even goes so far as to exclaim that he was on a deathbed when he states, the coffin yawned. They, talking about his heirs, took my possessions. While I was not yet dead, the death wail was ready. The sufferer goes through some pains to ensure that his readers understand the fact that no one can truly understand the gods, which then in turn acts as a sort of proof and an understanding of a situation. Again, we have to remember that the sickness baffled the conjurers, for he's proven his innocence in the matter. Nonetheless, from verse 34 on the front side of the tablet, of tablet 1 and following, we find the sufferer state in parallelism, what is innocent of itself to God is evil. What in one's heart is contemptible to one's God is good. Who can understand the thoughts of the gods in heaven? The counsel of God is full of destruction. Who can understand? Where may human beings learn the ways of God? He who lives at evening is dead in the morning. Quickly he is troubled. All at once he's oppressed. At one moment he sings and plays, in twinkling of an eye, he howls like a funeral mourner. Like sunshine and clouds, their thoughts change. They're hungry like a corpse. They are filled and rival their God. In prosperity, they speak of climbing to heaven, trouble overtakes them, and they speak of going down to Sheol. A summary of these 5 examples could simply be that we mere humans have no way in which to comprehend the actions of the gods. Implied within these statements is the idea that God himself is the reason for the calamity of the sufferer. In fact, one may understand such statements as the counsel of God is full of destruction, and with a whip he's beaten me, there's no protection. With a staff he's transfixed me, the stench is terrible, as directly related to the God in question. Just in case one is not certain, though, a later conjurer makes this startling statement concerning the sufferer. He says, "He who made woman and created man, Marduk, has ordained that he be encompassed with sickness." Now, this is not an unfounded accusation, but rather an explanation of why the sufferer is diseased. It appears that Marduk was not shaken by this, for he eventually does heal the man through the conjurer. Well, several of these features of continuity and transcendence noted by Oswald emerge in the respective texts of Job and Lulubel-Nemeki. What we'll do here is compare the features of continuity and transcendence with examples from within each text. Now, for simplicity reasons, only 1 or 2 representative examples will be chosen to convey the significance of each. Also, if you hear some choppiness in the recording, that's because I have to keep pausing it to cough, so forgive me. Okay, polytheism versus monotheism. Now, this concept is self-revealing and emerges from within a contrast of a god and a goddess found throughout the Lulubel-Nemeki, though no other god is mentioned outright. 2 examples of this contrast from within the work are as follows. "I cried unto God, but he showed not his face. I prayed to my goddess, but she raised not her head, like one who the sacrifice to God did not bring, and at mealtime did not invoke the goddess." Now, this characteristic of Lulubel-Nemeki stands in direct contrast with what we find in the book of Job. Throughout the pages, the Israelite God is referred to by both the Tetragrammaton and the generic Elohim, but no goddess or the possibility of another god is ever referenced. In fact, creation itself is designated as Yahweh's doing by both the sufferer and the deity himself. Now, by images, Oswald is referring to the fact that the gods are recognized by idols or by other shapes within this world. Within a text being analyzed, the image reference is made in connection with the initial theme of impiousness bringing disaster, and is read, "One who has thrown down his fire pan, gone away from their images." Thus, an impious man is one who does not burn to an idol. In contrast, the book of Job makes no mention of idols or images, but instead delivers the speeches of Yahweh from within a whirlwind, and thus expresses the deity as a spirit. Now, some have attempted to interpret Job 31:1 as Job's denial of Asherah worship, where he states, "I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a young woman," but that seems to be stretching, in my opinion. Now, a low view of the gods, their lack of trustworthiness, and their abundance of selfishness comes through quite clearly in Lulubel-Nemeki, especially in the second major theme, no one can understand the gods. A good representative example of the complete mutability of the gods can be confined within example 4 of the above-mentioned theme. Like sunshine and clouds, their thoughts change. When they are hungry, they turn to corpses. When they're filled, they rival their God. In essence, this gives the gods more of a human personality than it does a divine nature, in a sense that divinity equals purity and therefore immutability. Now, this, of course, is arguably the one transcendence quality that is only apparent at the end of the book. During Job's suffering, he states, "Your hands have shaped me and made me, but now you destroy me completely." By the end of the book of Job, we find several chapters of monologue directly from the deity and all centered on the central idea that Job's God is in fact trustworthy. If only Job will place his focus upon the deity. Within the sufferer's response to Yahweh, we find that Job finally admits that no purpose of the gods can be thwarted. No purpose of gods can be thwarted, not of the gods, but God's purpose cannot be thwarted, showing a real intention in the harm previously caused, versus, Marduk's purposeless harm. If a low view of the gods is evident in Lulubel Nemeki, then a low view of humanity is very much evident. Within the text, Marduk is in fact both the inflictor of disease and the healer from it, but no lesson is intended. Note first Marduk's ordination of the disease. He who made woman and created man, Marduk has ordained that he be encompassed with sickness. It's important to note, as noted before, that this quote is not from the sufferer, but from the conjurer sent to consult with Tabu Atul Bel, the sufferer. Instead of being an accusation against Marduk, it's simply the truth stated. Yet Marduk appears to take no offense to this truth. Simply put, Marduk did what he did. And as Tabu Atul Bel has already said, who could understand the thoughts of the gods in heaven? In contrast, while Job's initial thought is that God devalues humanity by paying too much attention to them in order to harm them, as evidenced by Job 7:17, what is mankind that you make so much of them and that you pay attention to them? Job is corrected when his God eventually answers the question himself, rather than by an interceding conjurer. In fact, that Yahweh actually took the time to answer the question himself shows a rather high value for Job. But then Yahweh proceeds to speak not only to the truly pious, but also to the impious comforters, establishing not only their importance, but his will for them to once again find favor with the deity. Directly in line with the low view of both the gods and humanity is the lack of ethical standards amongst the gods. In fact, this appears to comply with both the first and second major themes expressed within the document. The simple fact of the matter was that it was a common belief among the worshippers that if one follows the prescribed paths, then one will receive good from the gods. Nonetheless, things became reversed in the world, as the sufferer apparently lived his whole life in view of what he knew was in favor. This topsy-turvy world is expressed well in the following illustration. What is innocent of itself, to God is evil. What in one's heart is contemptible, to one's God is good. Or perhaps in prosperity they speak of climbing to heaven, trouble overtakes them, and they speak of going down to Sheol. Although Job does in fact doubt God's purpose in Job's suffering, Job is ever faithful. From the beginning, Job states, "Should we receive what is good from God and not also what is evil?" At times, Job wishes for death and even curses the day he was born. But in the end, he states concerning all he has said in complaint, "I have declared without understanding things too wonderful for me to know." As stated before, the reliability of Yahweh is seen not in his explanation of why Job is suffering, Indeed, only the reader knows this answer. We are the only ones that know that. But in the sufferer's willingness to adhere to his God even in such pain. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. Well, when comparing Lu-de-Bel Nemeki, or any other ancient Near Eastern text for that matter, with the Book of Job, and when looking at them through the lens of Oswald's continuity transcendence theory, some surface problems do arise. For example, within the Book of Job, there is, in fact, serious doubts of the deity's reliability and the deity's view of humanity, due in part to the deity's participation in the harm inflicted upon the sufferer. This can be seen clearly through both the words of Job's comforters and even with Job himself, making a striking comparison with Lu-de-Bel Nemeki. When analyzed as a whole, both the reliability of Yahweh and his view of humanity does come to surface in line with Oswald's claims. On the other hand, the same might be said about Marduk in Lu-de-Bel Nemeki, for Marduk also does bring healing at the end, though this healing appears to serve no purpose other than appeasing the cajoling conjurer. The difference between these two deities within these two texts, and thus the texts themselves, should be noted. As stated before, Marduk shows no signs of a purpose for his infliction, whereas Yahweh uses the infliction to teach a valuable lesson to the sufferer and the comforters, namely answering the question as to from where true wisdom actually comes. Wisdom as to why suffering was occurring was attempted by the comforters and misunderstood by the sufferer. Indeed, it could be said that Job's comforters had more in common with Tabu-Utu-Bel than Job himself, for the wisdom of these four appear quite the same. On the other hand, Job, as a sufferer, is forced to recognize that all wisdom comes from Yahweh, and that his resting upon Yahweh's purpose is of utmost importance. In the end, Tabu-Utu-Bel finds healing and the story is finished. Conversely, Job finds comfort in his disease, only to be healed after. Job is comforted and shown the source of true wisdom. Now, a lot of similarities exist in the world, as common themes are found throughout history. This doesn't mean that the author of Job stole the story from Lu-de-Bel Nemeki. It just means that in ancient times, just like today, people wanted to know the answer to the age-old question, why do bad things happen to good people? As always, feel free to contact me if you need anything.